Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this talk about Codecepticon, which I hope it becomes part of your daily arsenal. My name is Pavel Tsakalidis, Security Delivery Manager, as just mentioned. I used to be a developer, and I currently specialize in delivering red and purple team engagements, and I'm a strong believer that purple teaming is much better than red teaming. The agenda for today will be Codecepticon's origin story, what it does, the obfuscation techniques used across all C#, VBA, and PowerShell modules, and of course the technologies used to kind of make it work. And we'll discuss some unintended consequences, some tips, something to do your life a lot easier. So it all began in February 2021, when I was in an assumed compromise engagement, and the client said, "We can't let you run an implant, we can't let you run a SOX proxy, but we still want you to evaluate our EDR and AV capabilities." So I was like, okay, there surely is going to be some sort of like obfuscation tools out there that I just use, obfuscate tools, bring them in, and try to run. I realized that most of the tools that are available, they were either over-obfuscating something, making it unusable, or were not as customizable, or they were just some plain scripts that do like replacements using regular expressions. As we say in the development world, when you have a problem and you solve it with a regular expression, now you have two problems. And this is how Codecepticon was born. Codecepticon's goal is to bypass AV and EDR fingerprinting. It doesn't do any in-memory techniques, anything challenging, the kind of hooking and unhooking processes trying to bypass in-memory detection. Most cases that I've currently used it include dropping the file to disk. Because let's say you find an open directory that allows execution and you can't run an implant, just drop it there and just run it like 2015. It has been mostly used in purple teams where you have like the freedom to fail, so you can try and evaluate in better conditions your client's capabilities. But of course, it has been used extensively in red teams as well. Originally, it started as a C# obfuscation tool only. And then, like while I was developing it, I decided I'm going to add VBA and PowerShell as well. The difference between Codecepticon and other obfuscation tools is that Codecepticon targets the source code. It doesn't take your assembly, your compiled executable .NET or whatever, and then works with that. It literally just, you point it to the source code and it does its job. It allows you to obfuscate, rewrite command line arguments, and then you can do whatever you want. It has a lot of command line arguments, so everything it can do leads back to a command line argument, and it already has profiles from some very common sharp collection tools. I will describe what the profile is further down. Codecepticon has been developed over the last year and a half. There have been a lot of blood, sweat, and beers involved, but it has been battle tested against these environments as a bare minimum. All of them have been like client environments. I didn't use any kind of EDR with like very specific settings. Everything on this list have been used with Codecepticon successfully at some point in time. So now let's discuss the techniques that are used to obfuscate something, and how would you, let's say you wanted to build an obfuscator, what challenges would you face and what would you have to kind of sort out? There are two big families of things you need to obfuscate: strings and identifiers. Each one of them has its own requirements, its own restrictions, and everything. Strings, the good thing about strings is you can obfuscate using anything you want. You can have unprintable characters, you can compress them, you can do whatever you want. But you will have to bring back the original version of it when you execute the code. That is its only requirement. When it comes to identifiers, and I will be calling identifier everything that is not a string and everything that is not a keyword. And by keyword, I mean the word function in C or the word class or anything like that. So it means anything you write, practically. So namespace names, variable names, function names, you name it. The problem with this is that you can't use special characters like space, exclamation mark, or anything like that. You can use the underscore. You can use digits, but you can't start the name of a function with a digit, and it kind of complicates things a little bit. But on the plus side, you don't care about what the original value was. So if you have sharphound and you rename sharphound to hello world, that's fine. It's still gonna work. So let's see what kind of functionality and capabilities Codecepticon offers. First and foremost, let's talk about string obfuscation. The first method, and you have probably guessed it, is basic C4 encoding. This is like something every tool out there does. The second one is just a simple explicit OR encryption. Every string has its own key. It's not that you have one key that decrypts all strings. You just have one per string. I don't remember why I made the decision. It just ended up being such. Next method is a very basic single character substitution. Every time Codecepticon runs, it will just create a mapping and just replace strings with those mappings. Following that, excuse me, that was loud. We have group character substitution. So it is an extension of the single character substitution, but it's just every character is like 2-3 characters long. But as I was developing this, I realized that the main problem, the main challenge I had to face was that the strings, no matter how I obfuscate them, they will increase the entropy of the executable in terms of what the EDR and AV detects. I realized that everything is still there. Everything is still in the file. So I thought, what if I take all the strings out of the executable and just load them when I have to? And this works surprisingly well, to be honest. But the only, so what it does is it takes all the strings, in basic C4 encodes them to deal with multi-line strings, and then puts them in a file. And then when you say, give me line 7, it will take line 7, bring it back, decode it, and you can use it easily. However, the caveat is that you will have to have the file somewhere where it's accessible from your obfuscated target. If, for example, it was a VBA script, oh, thank you so much. So if, for example, am I allowed to do this? Okay. So if, for example, we have, it's a VBA, you can hide your strings in an Excel spreadsheet instead of a file. And that way you kind of pack it together, but it's not part of the VBA, so you're kind of making your life a little bit easier. And this kind of sums up all the string obfuscations that are supported by Codecepticon. And like I said, the last one is the one that works the best. Remember that with identifier obfuscation, we can't use special characters. Digits have to be in a specific position. So I said, to make my life easier, I'm just going to use letters. That's it. The first way to, actually, the only way originally Codecepticon had to generate these sort of names, it was just random names. You would give a character set, you would give the length, and it will just start generating things like that. Late last year, I saw a tweet by Emeric Nasi where they discussed that in MacroPack Pro, they found some ways to kind of bypass the AV heuristics and how it detects malicious implants. I don't have access to MacroPack, so I just worked with the screenshot I had from that tweet, and I was like, okay, maybe I can implement the same sort of methodology and functionality in Codecepticon. And this is where these two came up. The first one is the no twins, which is practically the same thing as the random names we discussed before, but you will just never have 2 consecutive characters one after the other. The next one is a dictionary one, which you give it a list of words, and it will create combinations of those words. And instead of like using a character set, each word is going to be a character. So if it creates the string Monday, January, March, that can be your new namespace, for example. The main problem with all these methods is entropy. When the AV tries to understand if a file is malicious or not, one of the things it's going to do is going to check, for example, if it has anything that looks like a base 64 encoded string. And if it does, it's going to be like, okay, let's apply a little bit more scrutiny to this file because something might be off. So the problem with random strings is the entropy. The AV will be on you. The problem with no twin strings, practically random strings, again, the same. The problem with dictionaries, you have to make them or you have to download them, you have to have it in hand or anything like that. And then I thought, what if we can generate something that looks like English words? It doesn't have to be English words, but it's just something to kind of trick the AV and EDR into thinking that, okay, this is something someone named. And this, after a little bit of research, I found out that I can use Markov chains. Markov chains, and I'm just going to read this out, is a process for which predictions can be made regarding future outcomes based solely on its present state, and most importantly, such predictions are just as good as the ones that could be made knowing the process's full history. There is a lot to unpack here. I'm not sure I even I understand the premise. I have no idea how it actually works. I'm not a mathematician. If I was, it would have been called Pavlov chain, but it isn't. But in a very short, kind of a very simplified explanation, you throw a lot of data in it into the Markov algorithm, and it kind of creates a frequency map of which letter comes out of which letter, and that way it knows how to generate your next string or word or whatever. Like the first version of PageRank from Google had a version of Markov chains in it. That's as far as my understanding goes, obviously. As a result, and this was kind of my test to see how good everything I found on the internet was, it may generate actual words. Some of these words are quite explicit as well, but I don't think anybody cares. At this point, once I found this, if it was me 10 years ago, I would have been like, I'm going to write this. I'm going to read how it works. I'm going to study it. I'm going to have my own implementation. It's going to be perfect. Glory will be mine. But of course, all of this was quite fun, like in my 20s, because now I literally go to bed at 10, and I'm 100% certain that someone out there has written something that is much, much, much better than what I would have ever written. Because it would have taken me like weeks, and I could have just found it. So in search of something that works, the main challenge is that you have to find something that not only works, but it's also in a state that is very easy for you to lift and shift. Because you don't want to spend like 4 days trying to implement something from an open source into your own code and then realizing it's not exactly what you wanted, you have to go back. But also the second most important thing is you have to have a license that matches what you, the license of your project. Because if you're using it like internally, I'm sure a lot of us sometimes just use something and then just delete it. But if you want to release something to the public, you have to make sure that all your licenses are in order. This is when I found this project by Maurits Elbers. If you have ever been in a situation where you have to find something that works so you can use it, if you see something like this, it will, at least for me, it triggered a lot of red flags. Like first red flag, just one commit. Second red flag, 7 years ago. Third red flag, there's no license. Fourth red flag is a combination of the previous three. It's like, it's probably not even going to work. But I was in too deep, of course, into the whole process. I thought, I'll just give it a go. It does exactly what I wanted it to do. Exactly. It was very easy. The code was brilliant. And I was like, OK, I'm just going to create a ticket to see what the license is from the author. But of course, I never hold a lot of hope into getting reply for tickets as such. So I create a ticket, and then I go back into looking for other code. In 14 minutes, Maurits responded saying it's MIT, which made my whole summer, to be honest. And now you're going to say, Pavel, why are you kind of telling us this story? 2 reasons. One, you don't have to reinvent everything if you're trying to create something. And 2, most importantly, I'm sure that most of us here have some sort of script or something we have written at some point that saved us, and we have never kind of released it into the wild because we thought nobody's going to use it. Well, I found this 7 years later, and it kind of saved my day. So please, if you have something like that lying somewhere in your hard drive, just please post it. Another very valid question from someone could have been, Pavel, so you have the dictionary which you used to train the Markov chains. So why don't you just use that dictionary and words from that dictionary into kind of your obfuscation? I have no answer for that, because when I asked myself that question, I was already too deep, and I was like, this is the only way. This has to happen with Markov chains. So I could have just skipped all of this and just used the dictionary, but it didn't work. Let's talk about profiles. So the current profiles, because to be honest, a lot of the talk is kind of geared towards C#, but a lot of the things work PowerShell and DB as well. The profiles that they currently support is Certified, Ruby, Seatbelt, Chrome, blah, 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 blah. What a profile is, just by looking at that, you will think, oh, Codecepticon only works with these projects. No, it doesn't. It works with anything you can throw at it that is written in C#, PowerShell, or VBA. It doesn't care. The only difference is that your project might need a tweak or two to kind of make it work. I mean, if you try something, it could be like it kind of over-obfuscated something or left something hanging, like a break statement or something, because it does a lot of rewriting to make everything work properly. But if you're having trouble, and it's a public project, you can please raise a ticket, create an issue, and we can have a look. So profiles are practically the cherry on top to make something work. That's it, there's nothing extra. At the moment, those are used, one, to ensure that all command line parameters are renamed, very important, because each code is unique in its own way. Some developers use a package to parse a command line, others do it manually, like SharpView has a completely different way of doing it. So you have to make sure that everything works correctly. The other thing is it removes the help output and custom logos. So if you run Rubius, it's going to give you that ASCII art saying, oh, it's me, Rubius. And you're going to be like, fine, but do I need it? So if it runs in a sandbox, do you want to give away the tool just by that logo? And the other bit is it has to rewrite parts of the code to make it work. So if you see the statement, this one says, if extension is JSON or zip, and blah, blah, blah. This is a syntax that's very specific to C#. If you obfuscate strings, it will replace every string with a function call. The problem with this specific statement is that that string, when you use that statement, that syntax, that string, it has to be a constant. It can't be a function call. So what Codecepticon will do is it will take it and it will rewrite it into its original form, saying if extension equals JSON, or extension equals zip, and then it will continue. And then it will kind of start the whole obfuscation. So that's where a profile will kick in and make your life a lot easier. But let's see now specifically the technologies that we use for each language. For C#, it was Roslyn. So a month after that engagement where the client said, no, you can't run this on our host, a colleague of mine pointed me to a blog post by Adam Chester about building, modifying, and packing with Azure Ops. That blog post practically is, because like I'm, excuse me, break. Sorry about that. As I mentioned, all the previous obfuscators, they just look at string replacements or just like something very basic. But in that blog post, I realized there is Roslyn, which allows you to have very granular control over what you want to do. So you can safely say this tool exists because I read that blog post. So thank you, Adam. So Roslyn is a .NET compiler platform, and it comes with Visual Studio. You can literally write code that writes code. And I don't mean you concatenate strings and be like, oh, OK, this is fine, just name it as .cs, compile it, and it's done. I mean, you can see the tree here. You can see a basic hello world, and you can see the whole syntax tree broken down there. So you can point to specific, you can say, I want all local declaration statements, and it will bring you all local declaration statements. You can rename nodes, you can rewrite nodes, you can delete nodes, you can do anything you want with anything. And because it's so granular, and so like advanced, I might say, you can rename just the namespaces if you want to. You can rename just the properties, or you can rename everything. It's up to you. You have that control in Codecepticon. Moving forward to VBA and VB6, some of you may wonder why I put VBA and VB6 together. Because VBA is VB6, it's just geared towards Microsoft Office applications. So anything you can do in VB6, you can do in VBA. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because if you're looking for something on how to do something in VBA, like hide an Excel spreadsheet, you would Google VBA hide an Excel spreadsheet. But if you're looking how to use an API, how to hook into something, what a constant is, like a Windows constant, just put VB6 in front, and the amount of resources out there is insane. And I'm saying this because I was a VB6 developer for like a decade. Just like we had with C#, we had Roslyn, here we have NTLR. NTLR is a more generic Roslyn, if you may. So you give NTLR a grammar, which a grammar is just a file that defines the keywords, the syntax, everything it needs to kind of parse properly the information. And then it creates a parsed tree that you can walk. If you have never heard this expression, it means it creates the tree in such a way that it allows you to, what you did with Roslyn, saying, you know what, give me all function declarations. You know what, give me all variable assignments. You can do this when you can walk a tree. And I'm describing this because I'm going to mention it in PowerShell as well. So long story short, it is Roslyn for VB. On the other hand, As you saw with Roslyn, you could literally rename anything you wanted, just a namespace, just a function. Unfortunately, with VB and NTLR, this is very challenging because when you're collecting information, you can get the function name, you can get the variable name, you can do whatever you want. But when you have to actually rename something, let's say you find it in a usage, let's say you see a reference to let's say you have a function called hello, and you have a variable called hello. When you see it in the usage saying hello something, there isn't a way to tell if that usage is for the function or for the variable. And to kind of make life easier, I was like, it's just going to be an all or nothing. If I find a way to actually differentiate and classify that information, more than happy to. And this is an example of, on the left, you see a plain VBA, and on the right, you see the obfuscated. I'm sure most of you would have assumed that the obfuscated information is going to be like one long string of something that's going to be decoded in memory, it's going to do things. No, it's literally like someone wrote it and just used like different functions. And this works surprisingly well to bypass AV and EDR. As you can see, it kind of adds a little bit like tweaks. So if you see on the left, the RTL get version doesn't have an alias. So when you want to call it, you'll have to use that specific string. But on the right, the RTL get version is renamed to Chafik SNES, whatever that means. All these words have been generated using Markov chains. So you can see some of them, like up there, you can see wood, you can see end, you can see webbing, but everything else like looks English, but isn't actually English. And this is kind of how the obfuscation looks. Moving to PowerShell. PowerShell, we use the System Management Automation DLL, which again, you throw away the source code, you throw at it the source code, and it creates again the parsing tree with all the information. But it is not in a way you can walk through it, which makes it very difficult to just say, give me function declarations, give me like variable assignments, give me something. So it's like, again, like NTLR for VBA. This is for PowerShell, but it's less easy to work with. There's a lot of like tips and tricks we have to do. And because of that, and because of the freedom and how forgiving PowerShell scripts can be, it is very difficult to cover all edge cases. This means that if you, for example, try to obfuscate PowerView, it's not going to work. I'm telling you now, don't even bother. It will obfuscate everything, but when you try to load it into memory, you're going to get a bunch of errors. So complex scripts, if something uses like unmanaged code to run it in memory or load something in memory, like an API in a strange way, that may or may not work. But simpler scripts will definitely work. I'll show you an example further down. Just like with VB and NTLR, here you have some sort of like differentiation. You can just rename the function names, you can just rename parameters and variables. And this is the same principle as with VBA. And this is what an obfuscated version of a script looks like. So this is the get netNTLM script. On the left, you can see a string, you can see a comment, you can see information, the code. On the right, the comment has been removed, the strings have been replaced with basics for encoding, and everything else has been replaced there. You can see things like new object, systemnet, sockets, TCP listener. Those are reserved words, therefore those stay as they are. But it couldn't have been as easy, could it? Because there's always unintended consequences. If you have ever tried to obfuscate sharphound, you definitely came across this one. Because if you use collection methods, let's say -- collection methods DC only, you would expect that that information would be picked up as a string, like the DC only variable. It isn't. It's literally this enum. So if you rename this enum, all the collection methods are going to break. So we need a way, once we obfuscate something, we have to kind of map it into the new function this time to make sure that this works. So if you wanted to use DC only, you would use terths tans, whatever that is. For this reason, Codecepticon creates an HTML mapping file, which literally has all the information on the left what was, and all the information on the right of what is. And you can just search for whatever you want. So if we wanted to rename this command line from sharphound collection methods DC only, we would literally just search for collection methods, get the value, search for DC only, get the value, search for output directory, get the value, and then just replace them. and it will work exactly like you want it to. And this, I had this idea to kind of obfuscate the command line while I was on a call with, on the purple team, because they're much better, of course. And I realized that the client was actually using, they were searching in the command line for specific parameters, like collection methods, or like sharphound.exe. And I was like, I can just rename those and bypass it. Again, this works surprisingly well. However, at the moment, it's a manual task. There isn't an easy way to map it, because as you can see here, DC only belongs, is part of an enum, is part of a property, and is part of a parameter as well, which makes it very difficult to kind of generate the command line for you. So it's very critical to test your code before you kind of send it on a client system. Don't think that, oh, it compiled, I think I have the command line, everything should work. It won't. It never does. The next unintended consequence is that sometimes the output can be partially obfuscated as well. This is the case in Sharphound 3. It doesn't exist anymore in the latest and greatest Sharphound, but this is very good for illustration purposes. If you can see in the purple bits, purple properties, some of them have been obfuscated. So if you throw this file into Bloodhound, Bloodhound will not know what to do with it, and you're just going to end up with an error. Again, very simple fix. You use the mapping HTML file, you parse it through Codecepticon, and Codecepticon will just do a string and replace of the new variables or the old variables. You'll end up again with this file, zip it, Bloodhound, done. So in summary, always test first, never delete the mapping file, and always test first. Like honestly, I cannot tell you how critical it is to test something on your own environment. Known issues. So, of course, there are some things you have to deal with that you're like, you know what, I'm going to deal with this later. I can't be bothered with this right now. One of them is Codecepticon does not work with C# solutions that have more than one project in it. Case in point, Sharp DP API. If you try to rename or do something there, it's just going to throw an error saying, I over-renamed something, and there's no way I can't find a reference or whatever. So just remove one project, obfuscate it, and then you'll be done. The other bit is that it works with Roslyn 3.9 only. So don't update your NuGet packages to the latest and greatest version, because it's not going to work. I have raised the ticket back in February, but it still hasn't been resolved. When it comes to PowerShell, as I mentioned, complex scripts may or may not work, probably will not work, but if you want something specific from PowerView, just grab that specific bit, make it work independently, and then try to parse it through PowerShell. And that way, you'll have more chances of succeeding. And last but not least, VBA, you can't obfuscate a document. So you can't throw an Excel file to it and be like, OK, this is going to work. You have to get the modules, like Alt F11, get the modules, copy them in a file, obfuscate them, and then send them back. One thing to note here is that if you have a VBA document and it has two modules, and one module is calling the other, you can't obfuscate them independently, because if the function names are changed, you can't link them again together. So take the two files, put them one under the other, obfuscate the whole thing, and then split it again into the modules you want or whatever you want to do. For the C# specifically, Codecepticon will check if any of these conditions apply. So if you have a solution that has more than one project, it will tell you. It's going to be like, are you sure you want to do this? The same with the Roslyn version. It's going to be like, are you sure you want to do this? I understand this is a lot of technical information thrown at you. So let's have a look at something that will make your life easier if you decide to use Codecepticon. If you run the --help command, you'll be overwhelmed with the amount of information you will see there. And the point is, while I was developing it, I started forgetting which argument works with which one, can I use this one with that method or whatever, and it just didn't work. So I created an HTML file that practically guides you through creating a command. So you don't have to think oh, does command apply to C# or something? No, you just go through the file, click, and it will auto-generate the command up there, you copy, you're done. So I would recommend against using the command line to generate a command. Just use the HTML file. It will make your life a lot easier. Another thing is the requirements to compile and run Codecepticon are vastly different than the requirements of the tool you're trying to compile and run. So if you want to obfuscate Rubius, you will have to make sure that Rubius is able to be compiled independently first. Because you might be missing a .NET framework, you might be missing something else, a NuGet package or whatever. You have to make sure that it works. Specifically with C#, it doesn't create a copy of your project and obfuscate that. Because you might have a kind of hard-coded path in there, you might have something that works only from that location, like a legacy project or whatever. So the project itself will be obfuscated. In this case, don't obfuscate obfuscated code, number one. I mean, it will work, but why would you do that? And the second one is Git is your friend. So I've seen a lot of, some of my colleagues, when they try to use Codecepticon, because it's been like, as I said, developed for a year and a half, they download a project like in a zip file, they extract the zip file, they try to obfuscate it, oh, it doesn't work, they delete the folder, extract it again, and then try again. You don't have to do that. Just use Git, and then once you have something obfuscated and you're like, this doesn't work, just run this command. This is what I run. It will revert the project back to its original state as if you just cloned it. Like delete all files that were added. It will make your life a lot easier. And then you can obfuscate again and make it. You can practically make this into a pipeline. You can, for example, point, you know what, I want Defender, and then have a process running, obfuscating something, putting it in VirusTotal, checking, or like your EDR lab, checking if it passes, then giving it back, restoring, and all that. Always test first, and get comfortable with modifying code. This is for things that may not have a profile, or let's say a new version of something that does have a profile comes out, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Just, I mean, if you know how to read code, that's enough, because then you'll be able to kind of make the change that you want to change. And then you can be creative, and this has saved me a lot of times on client engagements. Like, do you really need all the functionality from SharpView and Rubius? Probably not. So if you're just using Kerberos with Rubius, you can remove everything else, just delete it from the file. And a good application to find like unused code and code that's not kind of is like dead code technically is called a JetBrains ReSharper. It's going to save your life. So I would recommend spending like 3-4 days going through the tools, creating like minimal versions of what you want, and that will give you better success against client environments. It may take a few tries to get it right. So let's say you have a configuration. You create your console command. You have everything ready. You run it once. You put it against Defender. Defender catches it, and you're like, oh, this isn't working. Now, revert back to the original version, obfuscate again, and see if it works again. Because sometimes, if taking me like 5 tries, the same configuration, 5 tries, because everything's randomized to get past Defender or any AV, and that works. And the last bit is, let's say you found let's say you're in a client environment, and you can't run command prompt, you can't run PowerShell. There's no way for you to pass arguments into an executable, but you did find an AppLocker folder that allows execution by any file. You can create an obfuscated version using Codecepticon, and then you can just hard code the command at the top of the function. Obviously, this will be the obfuscated version of the command, and then compile, and that will be it. You just drop the file, double click, and it works. I think some of you may be like, does it really work, like dropping the file to disk and like working, like something will pick it up? Something might, but you'll be surprised how many times it doesn't. And it has been a very good, like a year and a half, let's say. But let's see exactly how well it performs in terms of VirusTotal, because that was my benchmark. This is a very basic XML configuration, because Codecepticon supports console. If you want to put everything in a console command line, you're fine. But if you just want to use something like an XML, even better. So this is going to use It's going to rename everything using the Markov chain, and all the strings are going to be taken to a path outside. It's going to be like extracted from the executable. So if we upload sharphound, it's going to be 27 engines detected. This is the clean version of sharphound. This is just clone and compile. If you pass it through Codecepticon just with that configuration, it drops down to 8. If you have SharpDP API, it goes from 34 down to 10. Certify 30 to 21. At this point, you'll say, come on, 21 is quite a lot. Remember, you're going up against 1, the one that your client has, or 2 if they have an EDR as well. And that should be your main focus. Because if you see this, you're like, yeah, that's quite a lot there. It is, but for example, Microsoft isn't on the list. So if they have Defender, you're done. Seatbelt, 39 to 26. Rubius, 51 to 29. And last but not least, SharpView, 34 to 18. Remember the point I made about, like, do you really need all the functionality? So I took a version of SharpView, and I removed everything except the user and computer enumeration. So that was the kind of minimal version. I put it through Codecepticon, and the detection rate dropped to 10. So it is worth going through the tools and just keeping what you want and what you use day to day. It will make your life a lot easier. For the future, what I want to implement is string obfuscation using Markov chains. I have no idea how to do that yet, but where there is a will, there is a way. I also want to integrate Office documents, so you can literally have your weaponized Excel or Word file, throw it at Codecepticon, and Codecepticon will be like, okay, here's the new file. The next one is to actually create the obfuscated command line. You could give it what you want, the original version. It will give you back the obfuscated one. And the last bit, which is the biggest one that I want to make, is I want to actually make changes in the structure of the code, especially with C#. I would like to get, let's say you have a class, and that class has 10 functions. I want to extract each function into its own class, and then I can have the structure in any way I like. And if an AV is checking for 2 things in different functions in one go, it's just going to fail at that point. In summary, you can find the code on GitHub, or just go codecepticon.com. It will just redirect you to GitHub. There's nothing on that page. There will be no compiled version under releases, because there's so many third-party components. Some of them require like a written consent to be shared. If you want any feature requests, bug reports, and contributions, you're very welcome. And I think I have a little bit of time to tell a story about Codecepticon.com. This will give you an insight on what kind of person I am. So a couple of weeks ago, I was like, it's going to be very cool if I just get Codecepticon.com to redirect back to like the GitHub. It's going to be much easier than say Accenture/GitHub, and then you're gonna Accenture/Codecepticon, and then you'll find the project. So I went on Namecheap. I just put Codecepticon.com. Domain is taken. I was livid. I was like, this is an inside job. Like, nobody knows about this tool. How can it be taken? It's not even it's like Decepticon, Codecepticon. Nobody can even like make this up. And all these thoughts go through my mind like within seconds. And I'm like, I'm gonna find them. It's gonna be blood. It's gonna be horrible. And then I go to Codecepticon.com, and I see like a Namecheap parked page, and I'm like, I use Namecheap. So I log back into my account, and I realize I bought the domain and forgot about it. So I just, so that's how Codecepticon came to be. This was the presentation. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. If anyone has any questions or queries or anything you'd like to talk about, please do.